Breaking news. Gen Z protesters in Nepal brought down their government and then held an impromptu vote online to pick an interim prime minister to head the new government. This means that Nepal, with a big Gen Z population, seems to have ushered democracy into the social media era. Welcome to The Why in History. I am Ajay Kaul, and today we take a closer look at the Gen Z protests in Nepal and what these mean to the rest of the world. Since the Anglo-Nepalese War of 1814 through 16, when Nepal's current boundaries were established, Nepal has had a very checkered history. Approximately the size of the state of Iowa, Nepal is a small nation sandwiched between Tibet and India. From 1846 to 1951, almost 104 years, one powerful Hindu family, the Ranas, took control of the government of Nepal as hereditary prime ministers, leaving the monarch as a figurehead. In 1951, Nepalese revolution Satsalko Kranti ended the Rana dynasty's hereditary rule, and Nepal transitioned into a democracy. Though Nepal transitioned to a democracy, the head of the state was still the monarch. And with the overthrow of the Ranas, the monarchy became more powerful. And one point to remember here is that the 1951 revolution had a lot of support from neighboring India. But since the start of democracy in Nepal in 1951, Nepal's fortunes have been controlled by four key variables: the monarchy and the three political parties, the Nepali Congress, the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist, and the Communist Party of Nepal, the Maoists. And this has resulted in Nepal's constitution being rewritten 6 times since 1951. That means, since its first constitution of 1948, Nepal has had 7 constitutions in total. Sometimes the constitution has been rewritten to ban the multi-party system and switch to a party-less panchayat system, only to be reversed decades later and restored the multi-party system. And within this mix, the Maoists started a rebellion in 1995 to abolish the monarchy. And in December of 2007, the Maoists had their way as the monarchy was formally abolished by the Nepalese parliament. And this meant that the president and not the monarch was the head of the state. The president was to be elected by the federal parliament and the provincial assemblies. Subsequently, Ram Baran Yadav was elected first president of Nepal in 2008. Nepal's latest constitution was adopted in September of 2015, which defined Nepal as a secular country, and KP Sharma Oli of the Communist Party of Nepal, Unified Marxist-Leninist, became the first prime minister to be elected under this new constitution. Since the adoption of the new constitution, Nepal has witnessed 7 different governments. But it has been 3 candidates who virtually played musical chairs for the post of the prime minister. And these are KP Sharma Oli of the Communist Party Marxist-Leninist, Pushpa Kamal Dahal of the Communist Party Maoists, and Sher Bahadur Deuba of the Nepali Congress. And as a result of this, between these 3 candidates, they've amassed a lot of power and wealth. Economically, though, Nepal is among the least developed countries in the world, with about 1/4 of its population living below the poverty line. And the economy is heavily dependent upon remittances, which amount to about 30% of the GDP. Remittances meaning money sent back by migrant workers, most of whom are in the Gulf states or in Malaysia or South Korea, where they work labor jobs. And unbelievable but true, almost 15,000 Nepali men joined the Russian military since 2023 and fought Ukraine after Russia announced a lucrative package for foreign fighters to join the country's military. The lucrative package includes a $2,000 monthly salary and a fast-track process to obtain a Russian passport. Nepal's passport is ranked one of the worst in the world with respect to global mobility, and it ranks below North Korea. There is also a high incidence of corruption within the political circles. As recent as 2023, a fake Bhutanese refugee scam was uncovered which defrauded hundreds of Nepalese citizens. High-profile political leaders and government officials were charged with multiple crimes for their involvement in a scheme that promised to resettle Nepali nationals in the United States as Bhutanese refugees. And as if this were not enough, the children of several prominent Nepalese politicians took to social media to flaunt their extravagant lifestyles. For example, Smita Dahal, the granddaughter of former Prime Minister Pushpakamal Dahal, flaunted handbags worth lakhs of rupees on social media. In another instance, the daughter-in-law of former Prime Minister Sher Bahadur Deoba posted videos showcasing luxury homes and expensive fashion. Frustrated with this political indifference, the Nepalese citizens took to social media and started hashtags like Politicians Nepo Baby Nepal, Nepo Kids, and Nepo Babies. And these posts went viral, some of them raking up to 1.3 million views on TikTok. Now, the Nepali politicians were unable to bear this criticism on social media. In response, on August 28, 2025, the Nepalese Ministry of Communication and Information Technology issued a public notice to social media platforms, giving them 7 days to register. And if they didn't, they would be deactivated. Now, there were two key conditions coming with this request for registration. One, each of the social media companies needed to have some regional representation in Nepal so the government could easily contact that representative. And second, it would be easier for the government to work with this representative and take down any social media posts that the government did not like or felt could create an issue. In fact, it was almost a year ago, on September 29, 2024, that the Nepalese Supreme Court ordered all social media platforms in Nepal to register before operating so authorities could monitor undesirable content. So the 7-day deadline passed with only one social media company registering, TikTok. And why didn't most of the companies register? There were two primary reasons. One was the relatively small market size of Nepal, and two, these companies had major concerns over censorship and user data. So on September 4, 2025, Nepal blocked 26 social media platforms, and these included messaging platforms like WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, and WeChat, as well as websites like YouTube and LinkedIn. So why did TikTok register? I'll talk about that a little later in this program. Now, the internet is the lifeblood of the people of Nepal. They use it to stay in touch with their friends and family who are working abroad. So when messaging apps like WhatsApp got cut off, the average Nepali lost the ability to connect and communicate with their family. The internet is also a very crucial and reliable source of information for the Nepalese. When natural disasters like earthquakes have occurred, the Nepalese have used the internet very judiciously to connect with local authorities and NGOs to get relief in those disaster-struck areas. On an average, Nepal has about 14.3 million active users on social media, which is almost half of the country's population. So on Sunday, the 7th of September, word got out that the Gen Zers were planning massive protests in the capital Kathmandu against the blocking of the internet. And Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli mocked them, stating that just because they thought they were Gen Z, they seemed to believe that they could demand whatever they wanted. So on Monday, September the 8th, teenagers across the country bunked classes and in their school and college uniforms marched with placards condemning corruption and demanding better lives for all Nepalese. Wait, weren't they supposed to be protesting the blocking of the internet? Yes, and they marched with their cell phones held high, demanding that the connectivity be restored. But the bigger issue across this generation was the corruption and nepotism at the highest levels in Nepal. So this issue was brought to the forefront by these protesters. So it was like, yes, I need the internet restored, but along with that, I demand an end to corruption and nepotism and a change of government. And that meant that the primary target of these protesters was the federal parliament. So central Kathmandu was the scene of the largest protest. There was heavy law enforcement presence, and these protesters slowly made their way to the federal parliament building. Everything seemed quiet and under control, but then the protesters tried to enter the parliament building, and the Nepalese armed police immediately swung into action. Salvos of tear gas and water cannons gave way to rubber bullets, and then live ammunition. The armed police fired live rounds blindly into the crowd. A schoolboy in uniform was shot in the head, and searing footage of him bleeding out went viral in a short amount of time. By the end of the day, at least 19 young protesters had been killed. The shock and grief was immediate and universal, and it turned into outrage as the Nepalese believed that the government had murdered these children in cold blood. Home Minister Ramesh Lekak resigned that evening, but the Prime Minister did not. In fact, the Minister for Communication, Prithvi Subha Gurung, responded very haughtily to questions about the Prime Minister's resignation, saying the Prime Minister would not go just because some people on the streets wanted him to. Curfew was imposed across Nepal, but the following day, that is Tuesday, September the 9th, crowds began to gather across the country, defying the curfew. The crowds were enraged, and this time their target was not the Nepalese parliament building, but the houses of the prominent politicians. The homes of the three leaders who had been playing musical chairs for the Prime Minister's posts, that is Dioba of the Nepali Congress, Oli of the Communist Party in Nepal, Marxist-Leninist, and Pushpakumar Dahal of the Maoists, were targeted, and all three of them lost their homes. Prime Minister Oli and Dahal managed to escape in military helicopters, but Dioba and his wife got cornered by the protesters in their home. They were beaten, kicked, and punched before being rescued. Next, all three branches of government were attacked and set alight. The Singha Darbar, which is the seat of the executive, the Federal Parliament building, and the Supreme Court. It was only around 10 p.m. that the Nepali army finally deployed to restore control. Helicopter only after you resign. That was the message from Nepalese Army Chief Ashok Raj Sigdal to Prime Minister Oli when he was asked to provide a helicopter for him to escape and bring in the army to restore order. So following this condition from General Sigdal, Prime Minister Oli submitted his resignation on September 9 to President Ramchandra Paudel. And once the resignation had been submitted, General Sigdal deployed his troops to restore order. The following day, on Wednesday, September the 10th, General Sigdal asked Gen Z representatives to meet him and the President Ramchandra Paudel. Incidentally, President Paudel was the last standing civilian leader still in high office. So who were the representatives of the Gen Z protesters? The answer? Sudan Gurung and his non-profit Hami Nepal. Sudan Gurung is a 36-year-old founder of Hami Nepal, which translates to We Are Nepal. Gurung and a group of his leaders from Hami Nepal organized these massive protests using the messaging app Discord and Instagram. This group used VPN to access the banned platforms and issued calls to action that reached tens of thousands of young people across Nepal. So even though the social media ban was lifted on September 8 itself, the group continued its protests to press for the removal of the existing leadership and influence political change. So when this group met with General Sigdal and the president, they laid out a few demands, which included creation of an interim government led by a person of their choosing, dissolution of parliament and conduct of new elections within 6 months, impartial investigation into the killings on September the 8th, and an independent commission to probe the wealth and property amassed by politicians. And once this group of leaders came out of their meeting with the general and the president, they went back to the online platform Discord to conduct town hall style meetings online to vote for the interim prime minister. This was an amazing new development, almost the first of its kind, with the Gen Zers using technology to boost democracy in their country. The Gen Zers ended up voting for Sushila Karki, a former Chief Justice, to lead the interim government in Nepal. In 2016, Sushila Karki became Nepal's first female Chief Justice and cultivated a reputation as a no-nonsense Chief Justice who stood against corruption. And this also led to Sushila Karki becoming Nepal's first female Prime Minister. Now, Nepal's new constitution that was adopted in 2015 does not envision anyone from outside the federal parliament becoming Prime Minister. Sushila Karki is not a parliamentarian. But there is a doctrine of necessity, a legal principle which states that extraordinary situations can necessitate extra-constitutional methods. The president can appoint Karki as interim prime minister under this principle. So on Friday, September the 12th, Sushila Karki was sworn in as the new interim prime minister of Nepal. So what are the implications of these Gen Z's protests and the outcome for Nepal's immediate neighbors, India and China? India is Nepal's biggest trading partner, followed by China. And both of them have been trying to woo Nepal, which is a small buffer zone between the two. In fact, ousted Prime Minister K.P. Sharma Oli had turned more to China in recent times, and China had reciprocated by inviting him over to Beijing, and this had resulted in the signing of the framework for the implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative in Nepal. And TikTok, that had been banned in Nepal, saw its ban suddenly lifted just a few months before this visit. The argument provided was that all social media sites needed to be treated equally. Subsequently, though, TikTok did adhere to the directives from the government and registered with the local administration. India was not too happy about these developments, and the ouster of K.P. Sharma Oli has made India breathe a sigh of relief. So currently, it is a wait-and-watch game for both India and China as the new administration in Nepal executes on the plans for the future. Overall, Nepal has to be proud of its Gen Zers for utilizing technology to initiate the fall of a corrupt system of government and pave the way for a better future. But as the rest of the world acknowledges and presents this as a shining example of the change the Gen Zers can initiate, one must recognize and acknowledge the outstanding leadership displayed by Army Chief General Sigdal. He and his troops could have easily followed orders from K.P. Sharma Oli and suppressed the protests. but he acknowledged that he was in office to serve the country rather than a corrupt administration. The way he brought the situation under control through smart thinking rather than applying force is truly exemplary, and the generals in neighboring Pakistan can really learn from this example. And it is on that note that we end this section of the program. On to the quiz section. Question from the previous episode. Which suspected World War II Class A war criminal went on to become the Prime Minister of their country? Nobusuke Kishi was imprisoned as a suspected Class A war criminal by the United States after World War II. But he was never charged, tried, or convicted and was released in 1948. Kishi went on to become Japan's Prime Minister from 1957 to 1960. So the answer is B, Japan's Nobusuke Kishi. Question for the current episode. Which of the following statements are true about Nepal? A. Nepal is the birthplace of the Buddha. B. The second highest mountain peak after Mount Everest is also in Nepal. C. Nepal is the only country in the world with a triangular national flag. Or D. Nepal is the only Hindu state in the world. Once again, which of the following are true about Nepal? A. Nepal is the birthplace of the Buddha. B. The second highest mountain peak after Mount Everest is also in Nepal. C. Nepal is the only country in the world with a triangular national flag. Or D. Nepal is the only Hindu state in the world. This is a slightly trick question, so be careful when you come up with your answers. And the answer will be provided in the next episode. That's all we have in the current episode. We'll meet again in 2 weeks with another interesting and exciting episode on world history. Till then, stay safe, but keep exploring the why in history.